The Gongfu Crew podcast, bringing together practitioners of various styles and schools and their unique perspectives to explore the world of Chinese martial arts. In the first full episode of the Gongfu Crew podcast, I have the honor of speaking to none other than Will Wain-Williams. Will is the man behind the multi-channel platform Monkey Steals Peach, where he shows his travels to different parts of Asia, where he's meeting with practitioners and teachers of various styles of Chinese martial arts. His videos and his various channels have deservedly received quite a bit of attention. Since he's busy highlighting other teachers and styles, it may sometimes be forgotten that he's also an accomplished practitioner of Tanglangquan himself, Praying Mantis style Kungfu. And this is what we will dive into in this first episode. At the end of our interview, we will also talk a little bit about what's next for his channel and what he's doing there, but the main focus will be his martial arts practice. Now on to the episode, and I hope you have fun while we explore the lair of the praying mantis. Welcome to this episode of the Gongfu Crew podcast. Welcome, Will. Thanks for being here. I'm really glad that we managed to do this. I assume that a lot of people already know who you are, but maybe it would be still interesting for you to quickly introduce yourself and just say a few things about you and your background and where you're coming from.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. So about myself, I'm a practitioner of Mantis Kungfu, which I learned when I was living in China. So I moved to China in 2007 when I was 18 years old. I stayed there for about 13 years. Most of the time I was living in Shandong province, which is the both birthplace and home of Mantis. So I was very lucky that I had the chance to learn it in its, I guess you could say, its natural environment. And during that time, I started a YouTube channel called Monkey Steals Peach. So on that channel, I've been traveling around different parts of China, interviewing different masters of martial arts. And I've also expanded that more recently to covering like Southeast Asia and Taiwan and other places.
So before I think there are a couple of interesting things that we should also dive deeper into. But before we do that, maybe let's talk a little bit about some basic issues, maybe some basic definitions, because we're talking about martial arts. Just to give people an idea of your own frame of reference, like how would you define martial arts? Like, what is a martial art for you?
That's quite a deep question. So what is martial arts? I would say in the most broad sense, it's a martial art is something that encompasses combat, physical training, and in some situations, but not all, some form of mental or spiritual training. As I say, that's sort of a sometimes, but at the very basic level, it's something that focuses on combat and physically enhancing the body.
And like, what terms do you usually use to describe what you do? I mean, other than obviously praying mantis or Tanglangquan, like, do you use Gongfu or Kungfu or Wushu, which is very common in China, or just martial arts?
This is actually a really interesting one. Yeah. When I'm speaking to a general audience, for the sake of convenience, I tend to just use the anglicized word Kung Fu, which, obviously is Gongfu in Mandarin. That being said, actually in China, in mainland China at least, they don't tend to use that word very much. They do more in recent years, but traditionally it's not really used very much. They tend to use more sort of colloquial terms, quite often just using the word quan, which is just, boxing or fist. So I would say that depends who I'm talking to as to which term I would use, because, like I say, Kung Fu to a more general audience, because that's what they know. That being said, I don't think it's 100% accurate. So if I'm talking to people that are more involved in the community, I'll tend to just use the umbrella term Chinese martial arts, or, even if I'm speaking Mandarin with people, I'll usually just use the word quan.
That's quite interesting because I made the same experience. Younger people in China, by now, they sometimes use the term Kungfu, just like Europeans or Americans or people in the other in the rest of the world would use the term Kung Fu. But the traditional meaning obviously is more like you have Kung Fu, you have the skills, right? If you and that is usually the context that people use that term, especially in the martial arts circles.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I think it's been picked up mostly by non-martial artists in China
yeah.
because of movies. But I'm not too familiar with Cantonese culture, but if my understanding is correct, using the word Gongfu or Gong Fu in Cantonese specifically for martial arts is more of a Cantonese colloquialism, which had
Hmm.
been popularized by Bruce Lee.
Yeah, 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 makes sense. Mm, so, how would you then define and describe Tanglangquan, like praying mantis? Especially, I mean, obviously not maybe not all of the different styles because there are a lot of different variations. But what would be like the typical characteristics, or what is at the core of the style of praying mantis that you do?
Okay, so firstly, generally speaking, there's two completely unrelated separate styles that both call themselves praying mantis. There's southern mantis, which is practiced by the Hakka people in
Hmm.
southern China, like Guangdong, Fujian, Hong Kong, that sort of area. And then there's northern praying mantis, which is what I practice and which is what I learned in Shandong province. Now, it's purely coincidence that the two styles share the same name. There's nothing in common with them. So what I'm saying only refers to northern mantis.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, I guess if you were to define what northern mantis is, it's a northern style of kung fu that comes from Shandong province in northeastern China. It's around about 300 years old, and it's really, I would say, it's a kind of what's the word, like a composite style that sort of absorbed and amalgamated a lot of local village styles
Hmm.
from the area. And obviously the defining feature of it being called mantis is using the hand in like a hook shape.
Hmm.
People often misunderstand that and think that you're striking with the fingers, like using the fingers to strike pressure points or things like that. The hooking
Hmm.
is more about grabbing, controlling, whether that's grabbing at the wrist, grabbing further up the arm, even grabbing the neck and the head in sort of like a clinch, uh,
Hmm.
even sometimes grabbing the face. If having your hand on someone's face makes it much easier to get a takedown because they don't want to resist the movement when your fingers are in their eyes and nose and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, the most defining feature is the use of the hook to control the opponent. Much the way that like how a mantis will catch a cicada or some other kind of prey, right? It's sort of
Yeah.
its claws like lash out really really fast. It catches the thing and it pulls it in, and once it's got hold, it doesn't let go. It pulls it in tightly and keeps hold of it while it devours it. So
Yeah.
I guess the main principle is that to grab hold of the opponent, don't let them go, control them to then finish them off.
Hmm. That sounds a lot like, because I mean in Chinese martial arts you often have this separation into changquan, like long boxing, and duanda, like the short striking or short range styles. Is Tanglangquan, is praying mantis then more of a duanda system, like a short range fighting system?
It's a combination of both. This is actually discussed quite a bit in the old manuscripts. There's quite a lot of old poems and things that
Hmm.
talk about the relationship between long fist and short strikes, and mantis kind of takes aspects of both. So I can't remember the specific words of the poem off the top of my head, but the general gist of it is that long fist is kind of your frame. It's like the origin or the first like foundation of the art, but then short
Hmm.
strikes, duanda, is something that's then like brought into that and where a lot of the techniques come. So yeah, you're often alternating between that long and short, both as far as range and also as far as body mechanics.
So you already gave us a bit of detail regarding also kind of what the goal of the training is, and I would like to zoom in a bit more. But in order to do that, I think there's one thing you mentioned this in another video, and this could be a very interesting point. You mentioned that when you went to China as a very young guy, you essentially also just went to the parks and started talking to different teachers and just trying to figure out what they do, right? Because you didn't go there with a specific plan in mind. Is that correct? Did I understand that
Exactly.
correctly?
Yeah. I just sort of turned up. I didn't really know what I was doing. In hindsight, probably wasted a lot of time, but I suppose, at the same time, that's learning, right?
Yeah,
And
but then the question is like, how did you end up learning and practicing what you do? Like, what fascinated? I mean, there must have been something that drew you towards Praying Mantis then, and towards your teacher. What was it? What interested you in this particular style?
honestly, chance and circumstance. As a teenager, I was a Wing Chun practitioner, so I kind of had it in my head that I was going to go to China and learn Wing Chun. I
Hmm.
vaguely knew that it's a Cantonese style, so I thought, okay, I probably should be in Guangdong province, but I couldn't find a job teaching English there, so I ended up in the north of China, not realizing that Kung Fu is purely geographical. I thought I'd still be able to find it all over. No one had even
Okay.
heard of it because the Yip Man movies had not come out at that time, so no one had even heard of Wing Chun. And it was just by chance. I didn't even know that Shandong was the birthplace of Mantis. So it was only after I got there and people were telling me, "Oh, this is our local style. This is what it's all about." And I, became curious about it, and I started to become fascinated with the way it moves. This kind of very fast, explosive footwork, the combinations, striking high, striking low, always changing
Hmm.
direction. Still a lot of the trapping and controlling that I'd been used to from Wing Chun. But overall, I felt like it was a very comprehensive style that includes aspects of sort of everything that you can find in Chinese martial arts.
So then, and your specific teacher, was there something about him, maybe, I don't know, his skill, his openness, something that said, oh yeah, this is the guy that I want to learn from?
Yeah, so after a couple of years in China, and I was struggling to find a good teacher, I'd met lots of different people in the park, and some were good, but just none that really kind of I felt that connection. So
Mm.
I went to one of these big martial art academies, these kind of commercial like Shaolin ones. So I went to one of those for a year where it's like full-time training, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And I was actually learning Mantis in this academy from a younger teacher. It was very, very good teacher. But eventually I kind of, as I got to know Mantis and I understood the foundations and things, I thought, okay, well, who are these teachers in this academy? Who are they learning from? Like, I'm here in China. Why
Mm.
don't I go straight to the horse's mouth? So I started, looking up who were the sort of top tier of teachers, of Mantis teachers in Yantai. And I found that there's actually a list made by the Chinese Martial Art Association called Top 10 Old Masters of Yantai. And about 6 or 7 of them were Mantis. One of them was Bagua, one of them was Tantui. I can't remember the other styles, but yeah, most of them were Mantis.
Mm.
So, um, with that list in mind, I managed to find out just through sort of searching the Chinese web where a lot of these teachers were teaching. And I went around, I went to go visit them and chat to them. And, obviously all of them were very good, but
Mm.
it just so happened that Zhou Jiandong, who became my teacher, was the one that I think I connected with the most. I think just because just the way that right from the outset, the very first meeting with him, he kind of went straight to the point with the principles.
Hmm.
And I hadn't really heard the principles explained in such a concrete way before. Like, I sort of knew there's these, Mantis is like a principle based art and there's all these different ideas, but it was always a bit kind of abstract. But he was like, straight away, he's just like, this is it, this is it, this is it. And I'm like, oh, okay, now these kind of abstract terms made sense. So
Mm.
that was how I came to start learning with him.
What did that look like? Like, can you elaborate a bit? I mean, the format obviously without video is a bit limited, but can you elaborate on these principles and how he would actually teach these? I mean, you were not a complete beginner, but still, how would you go about teaching?
Yeah, so the first thing was he had, like, the very first lesson I remember, he was very strict on all of the basic stances have a certain poem, and the poem basically tells you how to stand, how to align the body, how to generate power. And so he was very adamant that, like, he was actually reciting the poem as he stood in the stance, sort of like what's the word, like a mnemonic. I think that's the word. Like because in the olden days in China, a lot of people were illiterate, so they'd memorize these poems and use them as training guides.
Yeah.
So he was very, very into that. And just, it's hard to really sort of say, because it's not really one specific thing. It's more just kind of overall apparent in his approach, that when he's teaching you a certain movement, he'll say something from the old Trempus, like the old manuscripts. So he'll just say some kind of principle, like as he's teaching you a movement, and so you'll know, okay, so this principle or this idea that I've heard before is actually this movement that we're doing right now. Everything sort of lines up.
Yeah. I mean, you've taught martial arts as well. I mean, you've taught Praying Mantis, right? How would you go about teaching someone if somebody actually approached you and said, "Hey, I want to learn this, like from scratch, essentially"? How would you go about this?
I think I teach quite differently to my teacher personally, because I know that for most Westerners, you have to take quite a different approach. I mean, most of the people that find their way to my teacher are people that already are quite familiar with Chinese martial arts and stuff. So I tweak my approach a bit more, and I try to explain the hows and whys of things as you're doing them, and I put a lot of emphasis on explaining alignment and mechanics, how to get the feeling of, like, pushing from the knee and then pushing into the hip and getting that connection, so that it's the hip that's driving power, from the knee and then into the shoulder and the elbow, and just try to get people to really feel that.
And would you use like forms for that, or single movements? Like, what's the traditional approach here? Is it a form focused style in general, would you say? Or
Yeah, I tend to teach the body mechanics in forms. I know there are styles like Xing Yi Quan and Xing Liu He Quan and things that have specific exercises for developing body mechanics. But the way that I've been taught and the way I teach is just through, as you're doing, whether it's doing basic line drills or forms. I think it's also just worth clarifying, when I say practicing forms, what exactly I mean, because that's something that I think can also be misconstrued. When I say practicing forms, I don't mean like, here's 20 forms, do each form one time, just run through them all. What I mean by that is, say we have one form that we're focused on, and within that form, we break it down into individual combinations or movements or segments, and then drill those and repeat those. For example, one of the common forms, Jia, which means the essentials. The first combination is like an overhand punch, followed by a low punch, followed by a back fist, followed by a kick. I teach that as a drill, as a combination, and doing that in isolation and repeating it and using that to explain and understand how the body's connected and how you connect the strikes via the twisting of the body. So if you're throwing the first strikes with the left hand, and so the left hip comes forward, the right shoulder comes back, and you're twist, kind of corkscrewing the whole body in one direction with that strike. And then when you throw the next strike, that's sort of already setting you up so that when you throw the next strike, the body twists the other way. Trying to get people to feel how to connect those two movements, into one body movement.
Does that include partner training as well, like actually working on applications or the techniques behind it, or is it mostly solo training at that point?
With body mechanics, it depends on which aspect. Some things I would say are probably more solo, more, better practice solo in the initial stages. Some mechanics specifically you can only get by feeling a partner. I mean, obviously, in the end, you have to do everything with a partner or with something. I mean, just hitting the air is only going to get you so far. But at least in the early stages, to get the body to fully extend and things, I think that there's a period where you're better practicing solo.
And then in these intermediate stages, you said, okay, so like you said, punching the air is nice, but it's limited in terms of what you will achieve by that. So what does that look like? Is there going to be like more partner practice, sparring, strength training, conditioning? What would you say is typical for praying mantis?
Yeah, so once you've got the moves down, and I'll also just backtrack a little bit here. So in my particular style, the forms tend to have quite large, exaggerated movements. And that's not exactly how you apply the movements when you're using them. The movements are kind of large and exaggerated to really drill the muscle memory of how to move, right? Because your body doesn't understand words; it learns by doing.
Yeah.
And so the best way to do that and to make sure that you get those tiny little details is to do the move in a larger way. Now, when you come to practicing the applications with a partner, the idea is the body mechanics are supposed to be kind of drilled in and set by doing the form. And so when you do something with a partner, you don't really think about the body mechanics. So you don't try to do the movements perfectly. They're just kind of in there innately and subconsciously, and you just do the application. You just think about the application and not necessarily about how to move the body.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially this aspect of exaggerating movements to train body mechanics, I think it's very typical of a lot of Chinese martial arts, which sometimes leads to confusion because then people think, oh, this is kind of a weird application because you're so open, like you're not protecting yourself. But obviously, you have to make it tight in order for it to work in an actual confrontation.
Yeah.
How would you then, like, is there traditional sparring, or are there, because like in Wing Chun you have also Chi Sao, in Taiji you have push hands, like very specific kind of famous partner exercises. Are there specific partner exercises in Praying Mantis? Is there commonly sparring or wrestling or any type of freestylish application?
Yeah, so we begin with some fixed partner drills. And where one person's doing like, say two, three fixed moves, and the other partner's doing, some other moves. And then as you're doing these fixed partner drills, you build up the intensity and the speed to the point where if you miss the beat on the drill, you actually get hit by the other person. So you're doing the drill actually trying to outdo each other, trying to hit each other. And then from there, you take, we've got, X number of drills. Let's say we want to focus on 3 specific drills. And those specific drills will tend to have one move that's, that's the same. And so from there, you could go and mix the drills up. So I might start doing the first drill, bang, 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 and repeating it over and over again. And then all of a sudden, without telling you, I just changed to the second drill. And then, you've got to react to that. And then at the same time, you could change, or you could change from doing the drill on the left side to the right side, or change from being partner A to partner B. So you're constantly mixing it up. So that's kind of the second stage. And then the third stage would be something a bit like sticky hands or push hands, which we call La Feng Shou. So La means to pull, Feng means to seal, and Shou is hands. So basically pulling hands and sealing hands. And that's a kind of free flow, sticky hands type thing where you're basically pulling each other's hand back and forth, and then just freely following up with different strikes and different movements that they have to react to. And then you're resetting back to this pulling kind of thing.
Okay.
From there, that would then lead into sparring. Like La Feng Shou, you're kind of almost sparring, but keeping a contact. And then you move to not having any contact and,
Yeah.
just having to enter and go from
And
there.
and it sounds to me like this drill is also connected to what you said in the beginning with this idea of like trapping as the core idea of praying mantis, trapping the arms, the legs.
Yeah, so a lot of the drills are focusing on that trapping, which would be, I suppose you could call it bridging, although bridging is a Southern Chinese term, but
Mm.
the idea of how to establish and maintain the contact. So the first stage or level, I suppose, would be something a bit more like sanda, kind of kickboxing, like just pure striking from a distance because you haven't got a contact.
No.
So you've got to just throw out punches and find a way to get that contact. Once you get it, you start with the trapping and sticking to try to control the limbs, get through the limbs, and then you want to end with usually some kind of takedown.
Mm.
Not always, but in a lot of cases, you're ending on a takedown. So then you're getting a bit more into grappling, wrestling type stuff.
So I think that's interesting for me because I always try to find the kind of the paradigms behind like how martial arts training also approaches physical confrontation. And from what I understand from you, the idea is not to actually stay in this kicking striking range, but to actually move close, right? So you want to kind of squeeze into the space between you and your opponent, and then you're leveraging. You said like there's a lot of striking, but I saw in some videos there's also a lot of like foot trapping and kind of sweeps. What would you say? What are the kind of the types of techniques favored by praying mantis in terms of striking, kicking, throwing, joint locking? Like what would be typical in your opinion?
So with longer range stuff, we have, I suppose, probably two main ways of power generation. One is more of like a whipping kind of power, a little bit almost like Tongbei, which is another popular style in the area. So there's definitely a crossover there. So you're sort of throwing the limbs out like a whip, keeping them very relaxed and often like say striking with the back of the hand or the knife part of the hand, things like that, slapping type motions. And then the other kind of long range power that we often use is more like a kind of clubbing type thing. So what you do is you basically keep your fists clenched quite tightly, your forearms clenched as well. So your entire forearms basically just become clubs, and you need to condition your forearms quite a lot as well, so that they can hit things hard and hit the other person hard and not be hurt, and hopefully hurt their limbs as well. And so then you're using these kind of clubbing, kind of chopping, cleaving kind of motions. So if you're familiar with like broadsword or saber techniques, Dao techniques, you're kind of using the forearm quite a lot like the broadsword, using the blade of the arm, much like the blade of the sword. So those are the two kind of main long range. Obviously, you have straight strikes as well, but I think we tend to favor like more round or downward kind of clubbing, chopping, cleaving kind of strikes. Kicks don't tend to be like big, powerful kicks. I mean, we do all those, typical long fist kicks as the warm up. You put your hands out and you kick straight, but
Yeah.
some people do like to use those in application. I don't. I like to treat them more as just a warm up and a flexibility exercise. But there are people that like those really big, powerful kicks. Generally, though, I prefer like short, quick kicks that are hidden within strikes. So you're striking and kicking at the same time, so that, they don't know where to block. And then kicks generally are aimed, scuffing the shin with the bottom of your foot, kicking the groin, kicking the ribs with the ball of the foot, sort of a bit like a teep in Muay Thai. Tend to be those sort of kicks. Obviously, for like friendly sparring, you don't want to be, kicking people in the groin and stuff. So I mean, you can adapt them and just use them as more like checks to kick the thigh and things like like you do in Muay Thai and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the original intention is to kick the groin.
And then short range, like what's once you bridge the gap?
You got short range punches, like punching into the body, sort of body hooks, body, thrusting straight punches, uppercuts, downward overhead punches, elbows, back of the wrist strikes, with the naturally hard part of the back of the wrist. Yeah, like I say, elbows, shoulders, knees, even the head as you're getting closer. I don't like hitting with the head, but it is a Mantis tool.
Yeah, I mean, might give, even when it works, might give you a concussion. I mean, it's not really.
And then going in even closer, you're getting into the, you're kind of trying to end, as I say, with a takedown. So like a sweep or not like a full hip throw over, but more sort of getting the, throwing them, more taking them down, using your hip to take them down, but more sort of at a horizontal level, not over the top. It's a little bit hard to explain.
So no radial throws, right? Where you have an axis and you like turn them around that axis, but more like, I don't know, like in Taiji Chuan, I would usually refer to these as knockdowns, because you don't really throw them in the sense of they're really lifting that much off the ground, but it's more like you really kind of, I don't know, knock them down to the ground, or is it?
Yeah, basically. I mean, technique-wise, most Northern Chinese martial arts have the same tools. It's just how you put them together. So I think the takedowns you have in Taiji, we have in pretty much similar-ish in Mantis. I think we do have like 2 or 3 more kind of what you'd think of as like, real judo throws, but they're rarer. But the sweeping and the, as you call them, knockdowns, I think are more common.
Yeah, same in our Taiji tradition. But you did mention conditioning, and I thought that was quite interesting to look at that as well. Like, how do you, I mean, conditioning can mean different things, but like hardening the body, but also strength training. How do you do that? Like, what are typical approaches in Praying Mantis for that?
So hardening the body from day one. I mean, one of the very first partner drills, even before you're doing all the trapping and different things that I was talking about, is just smashing your arms with a partner. Just clench your fists and just smash your forearms together, to obviously, harden the forearms, increase the density of the bone and all that sort of stuff. I'm not like a biologist, so I can't really give like the whole reasoning why we do it, but how it changes the body. But so we're hardening the forearms, and then also the body as well. So when we're holding our stances, a teacher or somebody else would come around and they would start to hit you in the, like, to kind of slap you in the ribs and in the belly and the back and the thighs with increasing power. So for a new person, they'll just sort of slap kind of gently like this, but once you've been training for a while, they'll really whack you. I mean, you've seen like in Okinawa, the karate guys with the sanjin. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that was exactly the thought I had, like Goju Ryu, Uechi-Ryu, where they have this a lot. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, exactly the same. We do that quite a lot. And then there is a specific Qigong exercise called Luo Han Gong that kind of takes it to the next level. So you wear like a kind of special belt or a sash. So you kind of like basically suck your belly in, and then you tie it round tightly, so that then when you breathe out, and you're doing the abdominal breathing, you breathe out, there's like a resistance. So it hardens all the inner abdominal muscles. Just gives you that extra resistance for that, for the breathing training. And then strength training, we do all the sort of usual Chinese stuff. Stone lock. I mean, I don't have a stone lock here. I just use a kettlebell nowadays, but sort of the typical Chinese functional full body strength things. Yeah, like kettlebell stuff with dumbbells, doing basic movements, holding small weights. Like we used to hold bricks. One of the advantages of doing it with bricks in your hand is because a brick's such an awkward shape, to grip it, it strengthens the hand as well, because it puts quite a lot of train on the hand. I know some people use like those jars, don't they? And they fill the jar with water and sand. A brick honestly does the same kind of thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's quite a lot of emphasis on strength training, but it's all about whole body strength and functional strength.
Yeah, and also
And the
what?
big, sorry, I forgot to mention one of the most important ones is the big heavy spear.
Right. Yeah, that's very typical for a lot of, especially in northern China. But
Yeah.
also this idea that that's what I got from you, that even when you work with a kettlebell, you sometimes kind of you take this modern training tool, or relatively modern, but then you actually approach it more in the sense that Chinese people would traditionally train it, right? You kind of adapt it to your own purposes.
Actually, a lot of the stone lock stuff, I don't think is that different. I mean, I've not formally studied kettlebell techniques, but at
Mm.
least from what I've seen, it looks kind of similar stuff. So
All right.
I just use the kettlebell just because you can't really get a stone lock in Australia. So I just use a kettlebell as a substitute.
Yeah. No, it's just like a reminder. I know from other people that they also they get tools, but they don't always use them in the way that maybe modern training would use them,
Mm.
which is fine. I mean, like I said, the principles are often very similar, but it's more adapting them to the way, like to your body mechanics, to the body mechanics
Yeah.
that you want to train in your style.
But at the same time, I think functional strength and full body workouts are becoming much more fashionable now anyway. So
Yeah,
I know a lot of Kung Fu people have this kind of stigma that, like, oh, if you go to the gym, you're just working your muscles in isolation. You're just doing this one exercise for your bicep, this one for your chest. But more and more people that I talk to that are really into strength training are doing full body, trying to recruit as many muscle groups as they can.
yeah. I mean, this also leads into not really a separate topic, but something that is closely connected to health. Like, how would you, as a practitioner of praying mantis, how would you define health, and how does it feature in your training? Like, is it something that you actively try to boost and go for? Is it more of a byproduct? Are some of the, because conditioning exercises, I guess, can also be unhealthy when they're performed not correctly? How does this feature into your training?
So I suppose one of the things that's really made Chinese martial arts survive into the modern day is the health benefits of it. Because, as China and other places in Asia where the martial arts are practiced has become more peaceful, people have sort of felt much less a need to focus on combat, on preparing themselves for violence. So they've embraced the health aspects of it, which I suppose were originally a byproduct, but have more become the focus of it over time. And I think one of the big things is that holistic way of using the body, that you're learning to move your body as a cohesive whole is obviously very beneficial for, all aspects of life. It's just, you just move more efficiently.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is really answering your question, or am I kind of going off on a beeline a bit here?
No, I think it does. It's I just find it interesting that different traditions do have, like, some for example have very specific exercises that they also call qigong, which are meant for health, and then you have the regular training, and for some it's more like it's all the same thing, or like
Mm.
with internal martial arts, the idea of health, or like not just protecting but also boosting health, is at the forefront of a lot of practitioners' thoughts. And I find it quite interesting how different styles and traditions actually approach this.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you now. So Mantis does have some more sort of, I guess you could call it neidan. You know what neidan is? Like internal alchemy kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I've never learnt it because it's a whole different rabbit hole if you go down there, that you need to be training full time your entire life to be able to focus on learning the forms and the strength stuff and the
Mm.
applications and the sparring, and doing all of this, these specific health cultivation things. So I haven't learnt them, but they are traditionally something that Mantis people would do. So there's a lot of these meditational exercises, kind of visualization exercises. A lot of it is a lot of it involves like doing certain kind of breathing, combined with like massaging certain pressure points on the body
Mm-hmm.
a certain number of times in a certain order. I mean, it's very sort of like alchemy. It's almost like a very specific recipe, I suppose, is a way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, you have to press this point 3 times, and then this point, and then this point, and then you have to, rub your belly 36 times clockwise and bite your teeth and 36 times and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, there is this aspect to it, but I would say it's almost a whole art within itself, and it's not something that I've really gone into.
But it also means that you can actually develop Gongfu skill in praying mantis without including many of these Neidan exercises, right? Because you said it's more like not a separate tradition, but like a sub segment of praying mantis.
I would actually even say it is kind of a separate tradition, because one of the first written records of Mantis, that's by a verifiable person, was written by a guy called Liang Xuexiang in sort of around 1840, 1850-ish. And he basically, in his manuscripts, he separated like 3 different arts. And it was like, these are the arts that I practice. One is Mantis boxing. One is 6-harmony spear and staff, and one is Luo Han Gong. So to him, these were like 3 systems. These are like the 3 systems that I have. So the Mantis boxing or Mantis fist is the hand-to-hand combat, which was in his time it was just 3 forms, and then something called secret hands, which was just like a list of single movements. And then the 6-harmony staff and spear was like an entire system in itself of spear and staff methods. And then the Lohan Gong was both like the kind of iron body practice, as well as these other like, Neidan type things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's only sort of more of a recent thing that all of, the weapons and the Qigong and everything have also been called part of the Mantis system, that people have taken everything that he was doing and made it into one thing.
Yeah. Does this maybe also speak to the eclectic nature that you mentioned, like this idea of taking different things and over time maybe they become more integrated, but originally they just took it from different sources?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's true with all Chinese martial arts, really. Like, the more that I get into this, the sort of deeper I go with learning about different styles and how they've developed and stuff. It seems like most sort of what we would call styles are really sort of very late 19th century, more early 20th century, where they've sort of become like a concrete whole. Like, this is, Mantis, this is Bagua, this is Tongbei Quan. I think when we go further back in history, it tends to be more people learn. You could almost even say sort of like how you have MMA now, right? Like, you pick your striking art, you pick your grappling art, you pick your ground art. I think people, they used to learn different things and they travel around and learn, find teachers who are really good at one particular thing. Like, there's this guy up in, whatever village, and he's really good with the spear, so I want to go and learn spear from him. And then this guy, well, he does iron palm, and he's famous for his iron palm, so I want to go and learn iron palm from him. So I think people more sort of made their own systems of taking different things from different places. I don't think it was quite as fixed as it is now.
That makes sense, because in some styles you can still, for example, the Xiaojia guys in Chen style, they also often practice Wang Bao spear. So they actually have a different name for the spear tradition, which in many other, like in other Chen style variations, I guess it might also have been a source of knowledge for their spear tradition as well, but it's not really a separate tradition anymore. It was already kind of sucked into the core, and yeah, that makes sense.
And don't you feel quite often things like spear forms and staff forms and broadsword forms and things tend to be the same no matter what style you do?
Yeah, that's something that we have here as well. Yeah. Does this also go, because right in the beginning when you defined martial arts, you also said that there should be also like a spiritual or mental training. Does this in the praying mantis system, is this also part of this Neidan practice, or does the core curriculum also include like introspection and meditational aspects, or however you want to frame it?
I think that goes more into the Neidan stuff. Yeah, I think that's more connected to sort of folk Taoism, folk Buddhism, kind of a mishmash of religious beliefs. I don't think it really has so much to do with the actual mantis combat techniques per se, other than the occasional reference in the names of certain moves. But I think that's more just a cultural thing of just what, words that people hear and are familiar with.
So when I understand you correctly, it's also this visualization. I mean, you did mention in the beginning with this kind of stretching the frame. I would assume that there is some element of introspection because you want to learn the mechanics and not just the external movements. But if I understand you correctly, and most of the what most people would usually associate with Qigong or Neigong is actually part of the separate thing.
Yeah. I think the mental aspect of the movement is more in the kind of like the idea of how you're using the will.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something from a Taiji or Xingyi perspective, like you'd be able to understand quite well. But it's more about that having conviction in the movement you're doing, right? So, if you're punching someone, but you're not really believing in your punch, it's never going to be as good.
Mm. I think in another context, you also mentioned this that especially Northern Chinese martial arts focus a lot on shi, on these, which is often translated as positions, which is not really
Yeah.
true because it's like a sequence with a certain idea behind it, right? Like sometimes it's also translated as picture, which also doesn't really describe it, but
Yeah. That's one thing that I think with all northern styles is that each movement is one entire whole and it has its own idea behind it, much like a Chinese character. If you change one aspect of a character, you change one radical, it becomes a completely different character. So let's say we were stepping forward with our right foot and punching with our right hand, that would be one entire idea. Whereas if we were stepping forward with the right foot and punching with the left hand, although it seems like we've only changed one thing, the entire idea of what we're doing is now different. And the mechanics of it, the way you're relating to the opponent, the situation, what can happen next, everything is completely different just because you've thrown a different hand with that same foot. So it becomes a completely different idea and concept.
which I find very fascinating because it's actually done in a similar way, for example, in boxing. Like the jab is actually different from a cross. It's not just, oh, I use the other hand. It's actually it's a very different tactical idea. It's executed differently. Totally makes sense. Maybe to kind of get this towards the finishing line. So what are you hoping for in terms of how maybe Chinese martial arts in general, but also specifically Praying Mantis, Kungfu, and similar, like the things that you're interested. How should these move forward? Like, what are you hoping for?
This is a difficult one because a lot of the conversation these days is around combat effectiveness and MMA being such a popular thing now. And I mean, like here in Sydney, every corner you can find Muay Thai, BJJ. It's absolutely everywhere. And so there's a lot of conversation around, well, what's the relevance of traditional martial arts? Can they stand up to modern martial arts? And so I don't really have a concrete answer for that because, should we try to emulate modern martial arts? Because then, you're only ever going to become a cheap version of something if you try to imitate it. So if we try to stand up to MMA and say, well, we can do all this too, then we just become like a copy of them. The question is it worth doing that? But at the same time, we do have to be honest with ourselves and say, if we're calling ourselves a martial art and we're, at the end of the day, every move that we do is a punch, a kick, a throw. It's supposed to be a movement for fighting, right? So we do have to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose we have to, as Chinese martial artists, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want from our art? If we want to be good at fighting, then we have to fight. If we want to focus on the health stuff, then focus on that. I think that's the main thing I would say. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just kind of rambling a bit too much now.
No, but I like the idea of not, like I said, not just imitating, but finding the core. Maybe I mean, for in my opinion, for people who are really into authentic Chinese martial arts, you can see that there is, like, you do develop skills that are highly relevant and helpful in a physical confrontation, right? They are actually the stuff works, whether it works in a combat sports format or something like that. That might be a different question. But I think then the question is also how to, maybe transport this to the outside, how make it visible. And I guess you, with your Monkey Steel's Peach brand, essentially, it's because it's not just one channel, right? It's kind of multi-channel. You even have a tool at your disposal to maybe show these more authentic traditions and what it's really like.
Yeah, I think what I try to do is just show it as is, because so few people, like, there's so much hype over martial arts, with the internet. It's so easy to try to live up to people's fantasies about what they think martial arts should be, and then try to cash in on that. So I try and show it warts and all. I try to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, I'm not trying to jazz it up and say, look, this is the most amazing thing in the world.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, like, badmouth it and say it's useless and irrelevant. I'm just saying this is what the Chinese martial arts are, and hopefully try to cover, like, the human aspect of just showing the people who practice it, and hopefully trying to convey some of their passion for it, and show them as the human, and what it means for them as a practitioner, and show how they've dedicated their life to something. Because I think, as well, we always try to find a reason for something, but can't we just enjoy it just for what it is? Can't we just actually enjoy the art as the art?
I mean, it has so many benefits, right? I mean, or it can
Yeah.
have so many different things, and I mean, you've already done quite a bit. You've been to, I don't know if I remember all of it, but I mean, you've been to Henan, you've been to Fujian province, you've been to Taiwan, you've been to Malaysia. But you also mentioned that you're going to go next. Where? What's the next plan for the?
Yeah, so this is actually the first you'll be hearing it, but I'm planning to go to Hong Kong in latter part of September.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So, with everything that's been going on in mainland China, it's not really been feasible to go back there and do the kind of videos that I've been doing in the past. So I've been looking more at I've kind of changed my focus to more how the martial arts are preserved outside of mainland China, like within the Chinese diaspora elsewhere in Asia. Obviously, Hong Kong is not quite Southeast Asia, but yeah. So what I want to cover is looking at Southern arts, Cantonese arts, such as Hung Gar, Choi Lei Fut, things like that, as well as some of the Hakka arts. So like Southern Mantis, which I mentioned briefly at the beginning, and Bak Mei, some of these other styles that I've never featured on my channel before. And I'm interested in looking at how the traditional arts have been preserved in Hong Kong, obviously without having the Cultural Revolution and all the stuff that communist China has gone through, and also how it's changing, and how popular are the arts still now, how relevant are they still to modern Hong Kong society, because I kind of feel like there was a bit of a golden era for Chinese martial arts in Hong Kong, sort of in the era of Hong Kong movies like the 70s, 80s, 90s. So I'm curious, sort of, where are they today, and how are they holding up against all the changes that Hong Kong's undergoing?
And you have the opportunity to go full circle and finally practice some Wing Chun, right? Because in Shandong you didn't find it, but in Hong Kong I think you definitely will.
Also Wing Chun in Hong Kong, yeah.
Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to this. So far, I really liked the different episodes because, like you said, it's usually a very authentic depiction, and you can see the far-ranging. I mean, you can see a connection between all of these different traditions, obviously, but also there's a wide spread of ideas of how to train, how to fight, how to preserve health, and all that stuff. Which is also, I mean, the basic idea behind this podcast. I don't want to focus on just one thing. Like I said, hey, this is what might work in an MMA context, but I want to focus on the all these different different cultural kind of artifacts that these martial arts actually are. Thank you very much for the insights into Praying Mantis and beyond. I really enjoy talking to you, and
You're welcome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me and let me ramble.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's usually, again, authentic, right? You want to show it as it is and not, don't want to put on like a rehearsed show or something. And
That's true.
and yeah, maybe we'll have another opportunity to talk in the second season. Maybe go deeper on some of these topics, and I think that could be quite enjoyable as well.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you had a great time. The next episode will air next month. And until then, feel free to check out our Instagram account, where we also feature some of the people we talk to, other practitioners and teachers of Chinese martial arts, and anything else that might be interesting in the world of Kungfu. Thanks, take care, and hope to meet again.